Olivia Baker sighed tiredly as she looked at the dashboard of her old Volkswagen. The red light was flashing again, reminding her of the need for repairs. It was 5 in the evening, and the sun was already slowly sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky amber. "This is all I needed," she muttered to herself as she pulled into the small Williams & Sons auto repair shop. The shop looked unremarkable, an old brick building with a worn sign and a few cars in the yard. But it was the kind of place Olivia considered the most reliable, the place where real masters worked, not the golden boys from branded services. She parked at the entrance and got out of the car. A light autumn breeze blew her brown hair in a loose ponytail. At 35, Olivia looked younger, although her eyes showed the fatigue of someone who had been through a lot. "Good evening. Is anyone here?" she called out as she entered the workshop. A young man emerged from under one of the machines. He quickly stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good evening. How can I help you?" he asked in a friendly manner, and Olivia involuntarily looked at his eyes, deep, brown, with a special warmth in them. "I'm having trouble with the engine. It's that damned light again." Olivia waved her hand toward her car. The man came closer. "My name is Lucas. I'm new here, but I promise we'll get your car fixed." Olivia looked at him skeptically. Something about him seemed strange to her. He was too neat for a car mechanic, his hands too well groomed. "Olivia," she introduced herself briefly. "And to be honest, I'd like someone more experienced to look at the car." Lucas flinched slightly at her words, but kept his smile friendly. "I understand your doubts, but believe me, I know what I'm doing. Just give me a chance to at least take a look at the engine. Your hands are too clean to be a mechanic." Olivia couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, that's because I just washed them," he quickly replied. "You know, hygiene is important even in our line of work." The senior mechanic, Tom, who was just passing by, interrupted the conversation. "Don't worry, Miss Lucas is a good technician. He will take care of your problem quickly." Olivia nodded reluctantly. Something told her that there was more to this Lucas than that. He was too different from the other mechanics. His speech, his mannerisms, and this strange self-confidence. "Okay, look at it. But if something goes wrong, I promise you everything will be fine," Lucas interrupted her, opening the hood. As he leaned over the engine, Olivia noticed that his work coveralls looked too new, as if they had just come from the store. "He's weird," she thought, but decided not to say anything for now. "You can sit there," Lucas pointed to a small sofa against the wall. "This might take a while." Olivia sat down, pulled out her phone, and started checking her email, but she was still watching the new mechanic out of the corner of her eye. His movements were too cautious, as if he was afraid of getting dirty. Men like that are always hiding something, she thought, remembering her bitter experience. "You know what?" she suddenly said, standing up. "I'd better come back tomorrow, when Richard is here." Lucas straightened up, and something like disappointment flashed in his eyes. "Richard is on vacation for the next 2 weeks, but I really can help. You just have to trust me." "I don't trust men who are too polite," Olivia replied sharply. "I'm sorry, but I'd better find another studio." She quickly headed for the exit, leaving a surprised Lucas standing by her car. As she was getting behind the wheel, she heard him say quietly, "You'll be back. This light bulb will not let you rest." Olivia started the engine and drove out of the workshop without even looking back. She could not have known that this strange mechanic was actually Lucas Montgomery, a millionaire who had specially taken a job at this workshop to get to know her better. 3 months before the meeting in the car repair shop, Lucas Montgomery stood at the panoramic window of his penthouse on the 45th floor, absent-mindedly stirring whiskey in a crystal glass. The evening city below shone with thousands of lights, but it seemed to him that all these lights were as empty and cold as the people around him. "Mr. Montgomery," said his assistant Victoria, "the charity event begins in 15 minutes. Your presence is required." Lucas rubbed his temples tiredly. "These social events again. How many of them are there? But you're the chairman of the board." "Everyone is waiting for you," Victoria insisted. "And what am I going to see there?" He turned around abruptly. "Another bunch of fortune hunters. Women who look at my bank account instead of me?" Victoria looked down in embarrassment. "Sir, you are being too harsh." "No, I'm a realist," Lucas interrupted her. "Do you know how many times people have tried to use me? The last bride even hired the paparazzi to film our accidental meeting." He downed his whiskey in one gulp and set the glass on the mahogany table. At the age of 38, Lucas had achieved everything he could dream of: a successful investment company, million-dollar contracts, real estate all over the world. But for some reason, it all seemed empty and meaningless. The next day, during lunch with his old friend Robert, everything changed. "Listen," Robert said as he sipped his coffee. "Do you remember Olivia Baker?" "I don't think so," Lucas shrugged. "Of course you don't. She refused her uncle's inheritance. It was quite a scandal in high society." Lucas was wary. Refused her inheritance. Why? She said she didn't want to live off someone else's money. She works as an editor at a small publishing house, drives an old Volkswagen, lives in an ordinary apartment, and she could have everything. "Interesting," Lucas said. "And you really never tried to get your inheritance back?" "No, never. You know, I know her a little bit through mutual friends. She's special. She hates rich people, thinks they're empty and arrogant." Lucas felt a crazy plan begin to form in his head. Where does she get her car repaired? In some small workshop on the outskirts of town. Williams and Sons, I think. "Why? I'm just curious." Lucas dodged the question. He spent the next 2 weeks developing his plan. First, he had to come up with a legend that he was a mechanic from another city looking for work. Then he had to take care of the documents. Money opens a lot of doors, and soon he had an impeccable history of working in various car repair shops. The hardest part was convincing the shop owner to hire him. "Listen, Mr. Williams," Lucas said, trying to look as casual as possible in his jeans and worn jacket. "I know you don't have any openings, but I'm willing to work for minimum wage. I just need a job." Old Williams looked at his letters of recommendation for a long time. "Something is wrong here. You are too intelligent for a mechanic." "I just like to read," Lucas quickly replied. "And anyway, can't a mechanic be educated?" Eventually, Williams agreed to hire him on a trial basis. And then the real test began. The first week was hell. Lucas had never been so tired in his life. His hands, used to expensive watches and computer keyboards, were covered with calluses and scratches. He spent hours watching YouTube tutorials trying to understand the basics of car mechanics. "You're holding a wrench like a fork at a queen's reception," laughed Tom, the senior mechanic. "Relax your hand. It's not a violin." And then there was that first meeting with Olivia. He was trying so hard to seem like a real mechanic that he probably overdid it. She immediately sensed the falsity, and it scared him. But at the same time, it intrigued him even more. For the next 2 weeks, he worked like hell. He would get up at 5 in the morning to practice with his instruments before the workshop opened. In the evening, he fell asleep reading technical manuals. His hands became rougher. There was always machine oil under his fingernails, but he didn't give up. "You know," Tom once said, "you're not so hopeless. Maybe you'll make a good mechanic." Lucas just smiled. He knew that Olivia would come back. This thought warmed his soul even as he walked back to his luxurious penthouse, tired, trying to wipe the machine grease off his hands with expensive soap. "She's special," he kept telling himself. "She's worth all this." So scared, so distrustful, but so real. Without makeup, in a simple sweater and jeans, she seemed to him much more beautiful than all those socialites who constantly hung around him at various events. "You'll be back," he whispered at the ceiling. "And next time I won't give you a reason to doubt me." Some time passed after their first meeting. Olivia tried to find another workshop, but everywhere there were either sky-high prices or waiting lists for weeks, and the damned light kept flashing, reminding her of the need for repair. "Damn it," she muttered, pulling into the familiar Williams & Sons parking lot again. This time she was met by a completely different Lucas. Instead of his suspiciously clean coveralls, he was wearing worn-out work clothes. His hands were covered in machine oil, and a streak of dirt was visible on his cheek. "I told you you'd come back," he smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. Olivia tried to keep her tone cool. "Don't think I came back because of you. It's just that there are no other workshops right now." "Of course," Lucas nodded, opening the hood of her car. "Is that light bulb still bothering you?" "Yes, it is. And I'm in a big hurry. I have a doctor's appointment in 2 hours." Lucas carefully examined the engine. "You know, there could be a bigger problem here than it looks. Let me quickly check the main systems." Olivia sat down on the same couch as last time, but now she was watching the mechanic more closely. His movements had become more confident, although there was still a certain grace. Yes, that's the word. He didn't move like an ordinary worker, but rather like a surgeon during an operation. "How long have you been working as a mechanic?" she suddenly asked. Lucas froze for a moment, but quickly composed himself. "Long enough. But I'm new to this workshop. And where did you work before?" "Oh, in different places," he answered evasively, concentrating on a detail. "You know, I like to travel, to learn new things." Olivia hummed. "You're a strange kind of mechanic. Usually, this profession values stability and regular clientele." "Maybe I'm just looking for my place," Lucas replied, a strange note in his voice. "Aha, that's the problem." He straightened up and showed her a detail. "See this sensor? It's broken. That's why the light is flashing. I can replace it right now. It will take 40 minutes. Olivia looked at her watch. "I don't have 40 minutes. I'm going to be late for the doctor's appointment." "Okay, then let me make a temporary repair. It will take 15 minutes. The light will stop flashing, but you'll have to come back in a few days for a full repair." She hesitated. On the one hand, this man still aroused her suspicions. On the other hand, he sounded confident and seemed to really know what he was doing. "Okay," she finally agreed. "But if something goes wrong—" "Everything will be fine," Lucas assured her, and set to work. Watching him, Olivia noticed that his hands were shaking as he touched the wires. "It's strange," she thought, "as if he's afraid of the current." But he quickly coped with the task. "It's done," Lucas announced after 15 minutes. "You can start the car." Olivia got behind the wheel and turned the ignition key. The engine started like clockwork and the hated light went out. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, pulling out her wallet. $50 for a temporary repair. But don't forget that you'll need to come back for a full replacement of the sensor." Olivia handed him the money, trying to ignore how carefully he took it. That strange grace in his movements again. "When should I come?" "Friday would be perfect. I'll order the part you need." She nodded and was about to get in the car when she noticed that Lucas was looking at her in a strange way. "Is something wrong?" she asked sharply. "No, everything is fine." He quickly looked away. "Just be careful on the road." Olivia started the engine and drove out of the workshop. In the rearview mirror, she could see Lucas standing there, watching her go. Something about the man continued to bother her, but she couldn't put her finger on it. On the way to the doctor, she thought about his strange behavior. Yes, he looked more working than the last time, but still something was wrong. These delicate movements, this correct speech, this strange smile. Maybe he's some kind of fraud, I thought. But the car was driving perfectly. The light wasn't flashing, and Olivia decided to put her suspicions aside for now. After all, he really did help her, and he did it quickly and professionally. "We'll see what happens on Friday," she thought as she parked outside the clinic. "Maybe I'm wrong to suspect him, but it's better to be careful." What she didn't know was how Lucas, as soon as she left, wiped the sweat from his brow and sank heavily into a chair. "Jesus," he whispered. "I thought my heart was going to jump out when I was digging through those wires. It's a good thing I spent 3 hours yesterday watching a video about repairing electrical systems in cars." Friday was a gloomy day. Olivia arrived at the workshop in the late afternoon when most of the customers had already left. Her face looked tired. Shadows were under her eyes and her hands were trembling a little. Lucas noticed her condition immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked as he approached her car. "Yeah, it's just been a rough week," she said. "Did the part come?" "Of course it did. Everything is ready for replacement." While Lucas was opening the hood, a woman about Olivia's age walked into the shop. "Livy, you're here," she called out. "Melanie." Olivia perked up a bit. "What are you doing here?" "I was driving by and saw your car. I thought I'd stop by while you were waiting for it to be fixed." Lucas was immersed in his work, but his ears caught every word of their conversation. The women moved a little to the side, letting the noise of the engines drown out their voices. "How are you doing?" Melanie asked. "You look exhausted." Olivia sighed heavily. "It's complicated. The publishing house is downsizing and I could lose my job. And then yesterday the heating bill came, which was a huge amount of money. And now this car. Can I lend you some money?" "No, no, no," Olivia cut him off. "I'll manage somehow. I always do." Lucas felt his heart clench. He knew he could solve all her problems with the stroke of a pen, but he also knew she would never accept it. "How are your dates?" Melanie changed the subject. "Did anyone show up?" "You know how I feel about relationships," Olivia replied tiredly. "After David turned out to be just another rich guy who wanted to save a poor girl, I decided I'd rather be alone." Lucas almost dropped the wrench. Now things got even more complicated. After an hour of work, he straightened up and wiped his forehead. "Almost done. Oh, by the way, congratulations. You are our 100th client this week." Olivia looked at him incredulously. "What does that mean?" "We have a special offer," he quickly explained. "The 100th customer of the week gets a free repair." "I don't see any announcements about a promotion," Melanie commented. "We, just decided to introduce it yesterday," Lucas tried to sound confident. "Mr. Williams wants to attract more customers." Olivia looked skeptical. "And you're sure I'm the 100th?" Lucas pulled out the logbook. "Here, you can check it." He had prepared the records in advance, knowing that she might doubt him. Well, if that's the case. Olivia still looked unsure, but it would be foolish to turn down a free repair. The next week she found an envelope in her mailbox with money in it, just enough to pay the heating bill. On the piece of paper was written, "You have won the lottery of regular customers of your gas supply company." A week later, the director of the publishing house called her in and told her that thanks to an unexpected investment from an anonymous sponsor, there would be no layoffs. On the contrary, all employees would receive a raise. Olivia felt that all these coincidences were somehow connected, but she couldn't figure out how. The only constant during this period was Lucas, who became a special element in her life. She came to the workshop more and more often to check the oil or to check the brakes. "You know," she said once, watching him work, "you're not such a bad mechanic." Lucas smiled. "That's the best compliment I've heard in a long time." "Don't get carried away," she huffed, but her voice was no longer cold. In the evenings, when Lucas returned to his penthouse, he felt a strange satisfaction. Yes, he had to lie, to hide his real life. But for the first time in a long time, he felt needed not because of his money, but because he could help, even if secretly. And Olivia. She still kept her distance, but something in her eyes changed. Perhaps it was the emerging trust, or just human warmth. But for Lucas, this was a huge achievement. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" he asked when she came to the studio once again. Yes, she agreed, and for the first time in a long time she gave him a real smile. It was really beautiful. Lucas realized that he was gradually finding his way to her heart in small steps through small things, and maybe when the time comes to reveal the truth, she will be able to understand why he chose such a difficult path. The supermarket wasn't too crowded on a Saturday morning. Lucas, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, was picking out groceries, trying to get used to the role of a regular mechanic even on his day off. He was so focused on choosing the cheapest pasta, because what mechanic would buy Italian pasta for $30, that he didn't immediately notice Olivia near the vegetable aisle. She was standing there, looking thoughtfully at the tomatoes, calculating something on her phone. She was wearing a simple tracksuit, her hair in a careless bun. Even like this, she looks adorable, Lucas thought, and at that moment she looked up. Lucas. Olivia was surprised. Do you shop here too? Good morning, he smiled, coming closer. Yes, I decided to replenish my stock. I didn't expect to see you here. Olivia looked into his basket. I see you're also saving on food. Times are like that, he shrugged, glad he had remembered to pick up the cheapest items. By the way, how about a cup of coffee? There's a good place nearby. He expected a rejection, but Olivia, to his surprise, agreed. Why not? She was almost done shopping anyway. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a cozy coffee shop. Lucas deliberately chose the simplest drink, black coffee, although he usually preferred complex coffee blends. So, have you lived in our city for a long time? He began the conversation cautiously. All my life, Olivia replied, stirring her latte, although there was a time when I tried to run away from here. Run away? Lucas was interested. That sounds dramatic. Olivia smiled bitterly. It's a long story. I have time, he said softly. Unless, of course, you want to share. She paused as if hesitating, then sighed. You know, sometimes it's easier to tell something personal to a stranger, although you're not really a stranger anymore. I know how to listen, Lucas assured her, and I never judge. 3 years ago I was married, Olivia began, looking out the window, to a successful businessman. It was a classic story. We met at a charity event. He courted me beautifully, gave me flowers, took me to expensive restaurants. Lucas felt his heart shrink. The story was beginning to resemble his own methods of dating in the past. What went wrong? He asked quietly. Everything went wrong, she smiled bitterly. It turned out that for him, I was just a beautiful decoration, a trophy. He wanted me to stay at home, go to beauty salons, attend social events. And when I refused to quit my job, he found another decoration, younger and more compliant. I'm sorry, Lucas said sincerely, feeling his own lie getting heavier and heavier. Do you know what's worse? Olivia continued. When I filed for divorce, he tried to buy me. He offered me a lot of money, a house, a car, anything to keep me quiet about his infidelity and not ruin his reputation. And you refused. Of course. Her eyes flashed with anger. I'm not for sale. I've never sold out and I'll never sell out. All these rich people think they can buy everything: love, loyalty, silence. But there are things that are not for sale. Every word she said was like a knife to Lucas's heart. He suddenly realized how deeply she hated everything he was. What about you? Olivia suddenly asked. Do you have a story? Lucas was confused for a moment. I'm not a very interesting person. The usual life of a mechanic is work, home, work again. I don't believe it, she shook her head. You have the eyes of a smart person. Such people always have something to tell. Maybe I will tell you one day, he answered evasively. But not today. They talked for almost an hour. About books. Lucas could hardly restrain himself from betraying his deep knowledge of classical literature. About music. He carefully avoided mentioning the opera he adored, about life. Here he had to choose his words especially carefully. When they were saying goodbye at the supermarket, Olivia suddenly said, "You know, Lucas, you're not like other mechanics, and I don't mean that as a compliment. Is that a bad thing?" He tensed up. "I don't know yet," she replied thoughtfully. "But I'm starting to understand why Tom praises you." Back at home, Lucas stood at the window of his penthouse for a long time, looking out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly afraid, not for money, not for business, but for his feelings. He realized that every day of his lies brought the moment of truth closer. And after today's conversation, he clearly realized that Olivia would never forgive him for this deception. "What am I going to do?" he whispered, leaning his forehead against the cold glass. "How am I going to explain all this to her?" But it was too late to retreat. He was already too deeply immersed in her world, too eager to be a part of this simple, honest life. And for the first time in his life, money, which had always solved all his problems, became the biggest obstacle to happiness. Monday morning at the car repair shop began as usual. Lucas was just finishing up the diagnostics of an old Chevy when he heard the familiar sound of an expensive car, a sound he would not confuse with anything else, the characteristic hum of a Maserati engine. His heart skipped a beat. A black sports car pulled into the workshop parking lot and an elegant man in an impeccable suit stepped out. "Lucas, my old friend?" Sebastian Black, his former business partner, exclaimed loudly. "What a interesting change of scenery." Tom and the other mechanics looked at the unusual visitor in amazement. Lucas quickly wiped his hands and walked over to Sebastian. "We need to talk." "Not here." "Oh, of course," Sebastian smiled sarcastically. "Maybe somewhere where your colleagues won't see who you really are?" They went around the corner of the building. Lucas felt anger boiling inside. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sebastian threw up his hands theatrically. "Just visiting an old friend, a companion, a man who gave up a multi-million-dollar business to work as a car mechanic? Seriously, Lucas, that's none of your business." "Oh, it's my business." Sebastian stopped smiling. "Our stock is down. Investors are nervous. Everyone is asking where the brilliant Lucas Montgomery has gone. And it turns out that he is playing the part of a simple worker." Lucas gritted his teeth. "I've handed over all my powers to the board of directors. The company is in good hands, but it's not the same." Sebastian raised his voice. "The market needs a face for the company, a charismatic leader. I'm not interested anymore." Sebastian squinted. "Really? Or maybe you're more interested in that cute brunette who regularly drives her old Volkswagen here." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "Have you been following me?" "Not at all, my friend," Sebastian smiled again. "I was just wondering what my old partner was up to. By the way, do you know that your Olivia hates rich people?" "Oh, I did some research on her. Interesting story about her ex-husband." "Don't you dare mention her name," Lucas snapped. "Or what, you'll hit me with your mechanical hands." Sebastian laughed. "Listen, you have a week. Either you return to the company or I personally tell her who you really are." "You wouldn't dare." "Yes, I would. You know, it will be interesting to see how she reacts when she finds out that her simple mechanic is actually on the Forbes list." At that moment, Tom came around the corner. "Lucas, Miss Baker is here. She says there's something wrong with the brakes. I'm coming," Lucas shouted, then turned to Sebastian. "Get out of here. A week, man." Sebastian straightened his tie. "Just a week." He got into his Maserati and drove away, leaving Lucas with a heavy feeling in his heart. Olivia was waiting by her car. Seeing his condition, she was worried. "Are you okay? You look pale." "Yes, everything is fine," Lucas tried to smile. "It's just a difficult conversation. The man in the expensive car, did he threaten you?" "Did you hear him?" "No, but I saw you guys talking through the window." It looked tense. Lucas sighed. Old scores. Nothing serious. You know, Olivia said thoughtfully, I'm beginning to realize that I don't know you at all. Perhaps it's for the best, he replied quietly. What do you mean? Nothing. He quickly changed the subject. So what's wrong with the brakes? All the time he was looking at her car, Sebastian's words were running through his head. A week. He had only a week to decide whether to lose everything he had built with Olivia by revealing the truth or to let Sebastian ruin it all with his meddling. You know, Olivia suddenly said as he was finishing up, if you need help, well, with that man, I can help. Lucas looked at her with gratitude and pain. You're very kind, but this is my problem. I have to solve it myself. As you know, she shrugged her shoulders. But remember, sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to simply tell the truth. If only you knew what the truth is, Lucas thought as he watched her get into the car. That evening, he sat in his penthouse office for a long time, looking at the photo of Olivia that he had secretly taken during their meeting at the coffee shop. She was smiling, and there was a sincerity in her eyes that he rarely saw in his usual surroundings. What am I going to do? He whispered. How do I keep what we have between us without destroying it with my truth? The phone flashed with a message from Sebastian. 6 days to go, buddy. The clock is ticking. Lucas leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He knew he had to make a decision, and he knew that any decision could cost him the most, the trust of the only woman who loved him not for his money, but for who he pretended to be. 5 days passed like one. Lucas made a decision. He would leave. He will disappear from her life before Sebastian ruins everything with his interference. Better that she remember him as a simple mechanic than hate him for his deception. Miss Baker, he said to Olivia when she stopped by the workshop that evening, would you like to have dinner with me? Just as friends. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you asking me out on a date? No, not at all, he answered hastily. I just would like to talk to you informally. Olivia hesitated, but something in his eyes, perhaps a hidden sadness, made her agree. Okay, I know a cozy place nearby. A small restaurant called Maria's turned out to be exactly the kind of place where Lucas could feel at ease. No fancy dishes or expensive wines, just delicious home-cooked food and a warm atmosphere. I come here often, Olivia said as they sat down at a table by the window. Maria, the owner, has known me since I was a waitress in college. You were a waitress? Lucas was genuinely surprised. Oh, I've been many things, she smiled. A waitress, a saleswoman, even tried my hand at an insurance company. But publishing is my calling. Lucas watched her talk and felt his heart clench with pain. Tomorrow, it would all be over. He would no longer see her gesticulating when she was telling something interesting, wrinkling her nose when she laughed, turning her cup thoughtfully in her hands. And you? She suddenly asked. Why did you become a mechanic? He almost choked on his wine. I just like to work with my hands, to understand mechanisms. Do you know what I like about you? Olivia suddenly said. You know how to listen. Most men are just waiting for the moment to talk about themselves, to brag. And you really hear the other person. If only you knew how much I want to tell you, Lucas thought. The evening dragged on slowly and sweetly. They talked about everything, books, dreams, life. Lucas allowed himself to relax a bit, to show his true knowledge and interests. Once he even forgot himself and quoted Shakespeare in the original language, but Olivia, fortunately, did not attach much importance to it. You're strange, Lucas, she said when they left the restaurant. Sometimes I think you're not who you say you are. His heart sank. Why do you think that? I don't know, she shook her head. Just a feeling. But you know what? I don't care. You're a good person. That's all that matters. They walked down the night street and Lucas couldn't help but take her hand. Olivia didn't pull her hand away, just squeezed his fingers tighter. "It's cold," she whispered, and Lucas took off his jacket without hesitation and threw it over her shoulders. "Thank you," Olivia smiled. "You are a real gentleman." "If only you knew," he thought bitterly. They stopped at her house. Olivia turned to him, and in the light of the street lamp her eyes seemed especially bright. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "It was very nice." Lucas could not stand it. He leaned over and kissed her gently. It was a light, almost weightless kiss, but it had everything in it: his love, his pain, his goodbye. Olivia returned the kiss, and for a moment the world around them ceased to exist. There were only the two of them, their intertwined fingers and the soft melody of the night city. "Good night," she whispered, pulling away. "Good night," he replied, watching her climb the stairs to the entrance. As the door closed behind her, Lucas whispered softly, "I will remember you, my girl." When he got home, he pulled out his pre-prepared resignation letter. Tomorrow morning he would put it on Mr. Williams' desk and disappear from Olivia's life forever. The phone was flashing on the table. Another message from Sebastian. "2 days, my friend. Time is running out." "You don't have to wait 2 days," Lucas said to the empty room. "I'm going alone." He went to the window and leaned his forehead against the cold glass. Below him, the city shimmered, beautiful, rich, empty, just like his whole life before he met her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. Forgive me for being too weak." Outside the window, rain began to fall, as if the sky was crying with him for what could have been, but would never be. Morning coffee with her friends was a tradition for Olivia. Every Saturday they would gather in a small coffee shop to discuss the latest news. This time, Olivia couldn't wait to tell them about last night with Lucas. "Guys, I think I'm falling in love," she confessed, twirling her cappuccino cup in her hands. "Finally!" Melanie exclaimed. "Tell me everything about him." "He's a mechanic at the Williams and Sons car repair shop. He's so special, educated, delicate, attentive." Suddenly Anna, who had been listening in silence, straightened up abruptly. "Wait, Williams and Sons? Is that the workshop on Oak Street?" "Yes. Why? And what's his name?" "Lucas. Why?" Anna went pale. "Olivia, you work in a publishing house. Haven't you seen the latest issue of Business Week? You know I don't read the business press. But what's that got to do with it?" Anna took out her phone and quickly found something. "Here. Look." There was an article with a photo on the screen. Lucas Montgomery, the youngest billionaire of the year, is retiring. The photo was of him, her Lucas, but in an expensive suit, with an impeccable hairstyle, against the backdrop of a skyscraper. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. This is some kind of mistake." "No, dear," Anna said softly. "Lucas Montgomery is the owner of the largest investment company on the East Coast. He is worth several $billions. But he works as a mechanic." "According to the date of the article," Melanie interjected, looking at the phone, "he resigned as CEO 3 months ago. No one knows why." Olivia felt an icy lump grow in her chest. 3 months ago. That's when he showed up at the workshop. "Oh, God," she whispered. "It was all a lie. Not again. Olivia." Melanie tried to take her hand, but she jerked it away. "No," Olivia exclaimed, jumping up. "I will not let you make fun of me again." She ran out of the coffee shop and rushed to her car. Half an hour later, she was at the workshop. "Tom," she called out as she ran inside. "Where's Lucas?" The old mechanic looked at her in surprise. "Don't you know? He quit last night. He left his resignation on Mr. Williams' desk." Olivia felt her legs give out. "Quit? Just like that?" "Well, he left an envelope for you." Tom took a white envelope from his pocket. "He said to tell you if you come over." With trembling hands, Olivia tore the envelope open. Inside was a short note. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid of losing you, although now I have lost you anyway. Lucas." "You bastard," she whispered, wiping away the tears that had spontaneously flowed down her cheeks. An hour later, she was standing outside a huge office center in the city's business district. On the 32nd floor was the headquarters of the Montgomery Company. "I'm looking for Lucas Montgomery," she told the receptionist. "Mr. Montgomery is on a business trip," she replied with a professional smile. "He'll be back in a week. On a business trip?" Olivia laughed bitterly. "Or is he just hiding? I can make an appointment for you after he returns." Olivia was about to refuse, but something stopped her. Maybe that night, that kiss, those conversations. Was it all a lie? "All right," she said. "Write it down." On the way home, she remembered every moment she had spent with him. His clumsy attempts to work with the instruments in the early days, his attentive gaze, his tenderness. How could he? How could he have been pretending all this time? "I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid of losing you," she recalled his words from the note. "You fool," she said to the empty room. "You lost me precisely because you didn't tell the truth." But somewhere deep inside, a question stirred. Was it really all a lie? Is it possible to pretend for so long, to be so sincere, to look with such loving eyes? She took out the business card the secretary had given her. The appointment is in a week, Olivia thought. Well, Lucas Montgomery, I'll have time to prepare a speech for you. Lucas returned from his business trip tired and devastated. A week in Europe did not help him forget Olivia. On the contrary, every little thing reminded him of her. Parisian cafes similar to the one where they had last had dinner, flower shops in Amsterdam selling her favorite lilies, even old Volkswagens on the streets of Berlin. Everything brought his thoughts back to her. "Mr. Montgomery," his secretary's voice on the intercom interrupted his thoughts. "You have your first visitor today." "Who is it?" he asked tiredly. "I didn't make any appointments this morning. Miss Olivia Baker. She made an appointment while you were out." Lucas felt his heart stop. He wasn't ready for this meeting. Not now. Not here, in this office where every detail screamed of his wealth and status. "Invite her in," he said, though he could barely breathe. The door opened and she entered. As beautiful as ever, but completely different. Instead of the usual jeans, she wore a strict business suit, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes cold and distant. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," she said, and the formality of her tone physically hurt him. "Olivia," he began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. "No, let me speak first," her voice was firm. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I just want to understand why. Why all the lies?" Lucas stood up from the table. "It wasn't all lies. Not all of it. Not the main part. Really?" She smiled bitterly. "So, who have you been all this time? A mechanic who happens to be able to quote Shakespeare in the original language. A simple guy who wears a $10,000 watch." "I was me," he answered quietly. "For the first time in years, I was real." "Real?" She raised her voice. "You lied to me every day. About your job, about your life, about everything." "I lied about the facts, but not about my feelings." Lucas came closer. "Everything that happened between us, the conversations, the laughter, that night in the restaurant, it was real." Olivia took a step back. "Why? Why couldn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because you would never have given me a chance." He suddenly switched to you. "I know about your ex-husband. I know how you feel about the rich. You would have closed all doors at once. So you've decided to cheat your way into my life." Her eyes flashed with anger. "To play the role of a simple mechanic to prove that not all rich people are bad." "No!" he almost shouted. "I just wanted to be loved for who I am, not for my bank account, for once in my life." This phrase hung in the air. Olivia froze, looking at him with wide eyes. Do you know how many women have passed through my life? He continued more quietly. And each of them saw only money, status, opportunities. And then I heard about you, about a woman who refused her inheritance because she didn't want to live at someone else's expense. And I thought, maybe, just once. And you decided that deception was the best way to find true love. Olivia interrupted him. I know what I did was wrong. He lowered his head. I know I've ruined everything. But believe me, every moment with you was real. Every look, every word, every touch. Enough. She raised her hand. Just enough. She went to the window, looking at the city below. Lucas could see her shoulders trembling. You know what's worse? She finally said. I believed you. I believed that I had finally met a man who appreciated a simple life, honest work, and real feelings. And it turned out, it's all true. He took a step towards her. I really appreciate it. That's why I left the company. That's why I worked in the workshop. I wanted to understand what it would be like to live without all this. He gestured around the luxurious office. Olivia turned around and he saw tears in her eyes. Didn't you think that maybe I would have understood? That maybe if you had been honest from the beginning, we could have... She didn't finish her sentence, but Lucas felt his heart break with pain. I was afraid, he whispered. I was afraid of losing you before I even had a chance. And now? She looked him straight in the eyes. What now? Lucas was silent. What could he say? How could he fix what he had destroyed with his lies? Olivia sighed and headed for the door. I need time. Time to think about all this. I will wait, he said quietly after her. As long as you need. The door closed and Lucas sank into a chair, feeling all his strength leaving him. On the table was a photograph of him in a mechanic's overalls, smeared with oil but happy, because she was next to him. Please, he thought, give me one more chance, the last one, and this time I will be honest. For 3 days after the meeting in Lucas's office, Olivia couldn't find a place to sit. She searched her memory for every moment she spent with him, trying to separate the truth from the lies. Remember how he helped the elderly Mrs. Parker fix her car for free, an inner voice whispered. How he brought coffee to all the mechanics in the morning. How he taught young Jake the basics of repair. She sat in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a blanket, and scrolled through their photos on her phone. Here he is, smeared with oil, proudly showing off his newly repaired engine. And here is their first coffee together, where he was trying so hard to pretend that he liked cheap, instant coffee. Stupid, she whispered with unexpected tenderness. What was the point of all this? But she knew the answer. He wanted to be loved for who he was, not for his money. And wasn't that what she valued most in people, the genuineness of feelings? Olivia remembered her ex-husband, his ostentatious generosity, expensive gifts, which hid his complete indifference to her feelings and desires. And then she remembered how Lucas had spent hours listening to her stories about the book she was editing, how he had noticed the smallest details of her mood, how he had been happy to see her smile. Melanie, she called her friend, do you think I'm stupid? Why do you ask? Because I think I'm ready to forgive him. Melanie was silent, then answered, You know, sometimes the richest people are the loneliest. Maybe he really loved you and was just afraid of losing you. But he was lying. Yes, he was lying. But think about it. What was real, his feelings or his bank account? That evening, Olivia drove around the city for a long time, trying to sort out her feelings. Before she knew it, she found herself at the Williams & Sons car repair shop. And she froze. There was a familiar Maserati in the parking lot. She parked it and saw him, Lucas, wearing an expensive suit, sitting on an old bench with Tom and other mechanics, drinking beer and laughing about something. No, can you imagine? Tom's voice came to her. Our billionaire was learning how to change the oil, and it's okay, he learned. By the way, Lucas replied. Those were the happiest 3 months of my life. Because of the girl, someone asked. Not only because of her, because of all of this, he gestured around the studio. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something real and useful. And, yes, because of her too. Olivia felt tears coming to her eyes. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing a role. He really loved this life, these people, her. She got out of the car. Hearing her footsteps, everyone turned around. Olivia? Lucas jumped up, spilling his beer. What are you? Don't ever do that again, she interrupted him. This is your last chance. And she kissed him, right there in the middle of the workshop to the cheers of the mechanics. Never, he whispered, hugging her. I swear, no more lies. And one more thing, she pulled away, looking him in the eye. Don't you dare quit working in the workshop. I see you've made some real friends here. Lucas laughed. I agree. Moreover, I have almost learned how to hold a wrench correctly. He's the best European car expert here, Tom proudly declared. However, he is still afraid of getting his hands dirty. Everyone laughed, and Olivia felt the last vestiges of resentment melt away. Yes, he had lied about his situation, but he hadn't lied about the most important thing, about his feelings, his desire to change, his desire for a simple, honest life. By the way, Lucas said when they were alone, I've been thinking. Maybe we can open a network of free car repair shops for the poor. Tom agreed to be the general manager. Olivia looked at him tenderly. I see that these 3 months have really changed you. You changed me. He took her hand. You showed me that true happiness is not about money. It's in the ability to be yourself, in love, in simple things, he smiled, and in the ability to hold a wrench correctly. They stood in the middle of the workshop where it all began, and both realized that there was still a lot of work to be done, a lot of talks and, perhaps, arguments. But they had already found the main thing, real feelings that are stronger than any social barriers and past grievances. And in the corner of the workshop, old Tom raised a bottle of beer. To the strangest mechanic in the history of our workshop, and to love that overcomes all obstacles,